You're listening to the Forward Thinking Podcast presented by CS2. I'm your host, Xander Broffel, and joining me today are two amazing marketing operations managers at CS2. One that you have seen before, Gany Rodriguez, and another first-time visitor on our podcast, Brian Morris. How are you two doing today?
Very good. Yeah.
Awesome. I'm very excited to have you both on. I know that this is a topic that you both have a lot of experience with, especially at CS2, and that is doing new implementations of marketing automation platforms. You know, it's definitely something that was on my bucket list. I never had an opportunity to do a fresh build until I started at CS2. I always just got inserted into pre-existing environments, but having the opportunity to set something up right the first time is like such a blessing. So I'm really excited to have you both on the call to walk our audience through some best practices that you've learned along the way.
Awesome.
So, Gany, we have met you already. If you are just tuning in for the first time and you have not met Gany yet, we did an episode just a few weeks ago talking through utilizing HubSpot in the enterprise. So it's a very excellent episode. I encourage you to go and take a look at that. Brian, because we have you on here for the first time today, I'd love to just give you an opportunity to introduce yourself to our audience. How did you get involved in marketing operations? And also, how did you get involved with CS2?
Definitely. I feel like I am just like a lot of other marketing operations people. I kind of just got pushed into it from being in marketing. So back in 2015, I started with campaign operations, just simply Marketo and sending out emails and supporting our marketing team. And then someone ended up just leaving from that team, and I got pulled right on it. And then the rest was history. I don't think ever since then I've really just been knee deep into marketing operations. From there, I moved into another company where I was a marketing operations manager and took on more of the more MOP side of stuff, not just campaign operations. And then I moved into a role where I was a single marketing ops person and wearing all the hats and literally down in the weeds, working really hard. And it was just a great experiences for me. And I got to work for a company where they really cared about their marketing operations a lot, and they spent a lot of investment in it and really cared about it. And so I got to do some amazing work and kind of build a lot of my experience there. And from there, I got a chance to move into consulting here at CS2, which has been phenomenal. And so doing awesome.
Yeah, you are doing awesome, Brian. Something that I really love about working with you is you have phenomenal reports that you create for all of your projects. And I'm always taking inspiration from things that you share with the team. As we like to say here, no project should end without having a report and a dashboard, and you take that to the next level, which I absolutely love.
Yeah, usually I'm trying to find any way to create a dashboard. I was just working on one this morning for a GDPR program. So, I mean, anything could be a dashboard.
Absolutely. Anything. If you can figure out how to do GDPR compliance as a dashboard, you can figure it out for anything.
Right? So helpful, actually. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, good. Before we jump into kind of the agenda and the topic at hand, I would just like to hear from both of you guys, maybe starting with Gany. What's your experience been implementing new marketing automation platforms, either here or, prior to your role at CS2?
Yeah, I actually had the privilege of going through a lot of implementations. I remember the first time I had to do one, we partnered up with an agency, and again, I was the sole marketing ops person, so it was a lot of just learnings from there. And then there's just been different flavors of it, trying to merge different brands into one instance, trying to migrate someone into a different marketing automation platform that I never had any experience with. So kind of all over the map, to be honest.
That's awesome. Very, very cool. Brian, what about you?
I feel like me and Gany have lived the same life here. So I worked for a company that were acquired. So we were migrating 2 Marketos together, and we actually decided to create a brand new Marketo and migrate both of those to a brand new instance. I also came where we had a HubSpot, a Marketo, and a Pardot that we were all migrating into a Marketo instance. And then here at CS2, I've gotten the pleasure of doing a brand new Marketo implementation as well. So I've definitely had my hands in the bucket of this. So I'm excited to talk about it today.
That's awesome. Very, very cool. So we have some great experience from you both. And I kind of stretched the truth a little bit with my intro. From my perspective and my experience, we've worked on a couple of implementations. Gany and I, we are direct partners. So I lead all of our clients, and Gany supports the same clients, which is great. So we've had some really good experiences together. But prior to CS2, I did do essentially as much of an implementation as you could do. It's just that we had some constraints, and the sign behind me, it depends. We always have to look at what's happening in the current state. We had some product stuff that was integrated with our Marketo implementation. So we opted not to go brand new, but what we did instead is we basically created a brand new workspace and a brand new partition, and we basically rebuilt from the ground up inside of an existing implementation. So we had a lot of the same sort of concepts that we could do throughout. So very, very neat. As we were kind of preparing for this conversation, because it's it's a huge project to do an implementation, but it's also a huge podcast to talk about doing an implementation. And we probably have 3 to 4 episodes that we could go into with detail, and I think that we will. But I think what we wanted to really get across today with the episode was high level, what do you have to do in order to have a successful implementation? Kind of break it down. So from a high level view, maybe we'll start with Brian. From a high level view, can you just break down what are the pillars of an implementation that we should frame our conversation?
Definitely. Awesome. So the biggest thing I would probably start with is pillar number 1 is that prep work. You want to think about your current database, what map system you're using, and what you're going to do from there. So really that prep work. And then I really like to think about the implementation itself. The first step would be your tech setup and what you're going to do with all your technology, and setting it up and turning it on and all the settings that go with it. And then from there, really the foundation of that map system, and then really the optimization, and then your monitoring and testing of those systems as well. So I really like to think of it in those those pillars, and really document that and walk through each pillars to really help you through it.
That's fantastic. And I think that you touched on optimization from within the implementation. But I know that we also are going to be talking about today, enablement, training, and the actual launch, because that pillar has a lot of pieces into it. And we always kind of want to make sure that we don't just say, hey, we have a new marketing automation platform, because there's a lot to it, right?
There's a lot. Yeah.
So just to repeat what I heard from you, we have basically 3 large topics: prep work, implementation itself, and then the enablement, training, and launch. Yeah. And then within enablement, we kind of have some sub pillars that we can think about forming. And that is our technical setup, our foundation, and then our optimization within the implementation itself. So that's what we're going to try and talk about today in about 45 minutes.
Let's do it.
So let's dive right in. Gany, let's start with the prep work from your perspective. Should I just build exactly what I have, or should I utilize a new implementation as a catalyst for change?
Man, that is a big question. There's so many variables that come to play with that. I guess for starters, you kind of need to, you need to fully understand your own internal processes and how your company currently does things to help drive that decision. Let's say, one of the things we always kind of push towards is to always optimize. So ideally, you kind of want to be a catalyst for change and optimize before you move into the new tool. just because at least that way you'll be able to solve a lot of the issues that you previously had. Probably one of the reasons why you're moving to this new tool is to help, expand a lot of its capabilities. But if there is a time constraint, you might be better off just rebuilding what you have, at least kind of to expedite the transition. But now you have a new piece of technology that you can kind of grow with your company, and you fully understand how it was set up and kind of manage it from there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's very well said. Brian, any thoughts there?
Yeah, I would say I really like that response too, because it's like, most of the times if you're moving to a new map, there's probably a reason for it. Did you not have the technical capabilities you had before, or, is your company growing? So there's probably a reason why you're moving to this. So you want to make sure, you might want to be a catalyst for change because you have this new ability to create different things. And, there's a lot probably that has came out or changed in this new map instance that you can utilize now that you didn't have before in your previous map.
Yeah, absolutely. This is the time to think about, what do I want my center of excellence to look like from an operations center perspective, right? We're partnering with a client, and I think that she's doing a fantastic job at looking at business processes, intake processes, who's going to be doing the builds, who's responsible for what, and that it's not just, did I get the widget to do what it needs to do? But, at the end of the day, we've also had experiences where we have a renewal coming up for our existing marketing automation platform that you're trying to migrate away from. So you have those constraints. I think that from my perspective, I will always be the advocate for do it right the first time, because you're going to spend the time either upfront or fixing a mess after the fact. So I'd rather do it right the first time. And maybe you have to pick and choose, like, what are the things that I'm really going to do right? And then what am I going to put onto a future roadmap? But thinking forward is probably like the best option that you have, no matter what your time and budget is.
Yeah, I think a lot of it also probably goes into, like you mentioned, the timing of it. Is a website launch also happening at the same time? What stakeholders are involved? Is your CMO pressuring you to, have this migrated or this implementation done in a certain time frame? So you might not have a choice but to migrate some stuff over because you don't have the time to be a catalyst for change and really start from scratch. So, a lot of times it could just be the timing as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Brian, we talked a lot about timing. Is there any other constraints that you can think of that, people should be thinking about as they start prepping for this migration?
I would say, definitely, like you mentioned, the contract negotiations. I mean, that's a big one. And like sunsetting the previous tools, like you mentioned that depending on that, like when your contract is ending and the next one's starting, that can often make a lot of decisions around, the constraints where, like I mentioned, you don't have a choice. You gotta be out of that platform by a certain time. You gotta move quickly, and you don't have that choice. Or sometimes, like internally, like if Salesforce is, if there's a lot of like tools in like sales ops that are changing, sometimes you have to, migrate or change your map tool to align with that Salesforce, for example, as well.
For sure. Gany, what about stakeholders? Who should I be working with, and when should we be pulling these folks in?
So one of my things that I always kind of just want to set up from the get-go is just an executive champion. Implementing a map is such a huge task just because it does touch so many other departments that you need someone that actually has a lot of authority to unblock things for you, just to make sure that you are hitting your timeline. So that's for sure the number one person you'd want on your side from the get-go. They don't have to run the meetings. That's definitely something that you can tackle, but they just need to be there to know how the project is going, but also know where it is that things are stalling and see if they have any leverage, and at least trying to rally the rest of the company to kind of help with this. Because you do find that you end up being very tied down just because it's a marketing tool. A lot of other departments see it as just a marketing only project, but again, it's
For
not.
sure. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we hear that a lot, right? Oh, it's just a marketing automation tool. It's just something that's sending out emails. There's so much more to it. You need to make sure that everybody understands the full scope. Great.
So especially because I mean, so most times you have to get sales ops involved, IT, your web development team, most of your marketing stakeholders and sales enablement and stuff. So, one thing I would always recommend is having that initial kickoff. So like Gany said, get your executive champion out on board, get everyone you can, from all these different departments and have that initial kickoff. So everyone's really better aligned. Everyone has that buy-in and you guys have that timeline of what's happening. So you guys can all move together as one rather than trying to piecemeal different departments together and try to bring it on last minute. You guys can all move along together at that project together.
Yeah, for sure. Brian, could you revisit that stakeholder list that you just gave us?
Yeah. We're really looking, I would recommend thinking about your executive champion, that sales ops team, your IT team, your web development team, marketing stakeholders, and sales enablement.
Fantastic. I know some of the experiences that I've had, maybe the web team was a little bit more surprised, and they have a lot of work to do, right?
It's a lot.
Whether it's, I don't have global forms, I do have global forms, how I want to do my web tracking, CNAMEs, DKIMs, all of the things that need to get set up on the back end. So prior to getting that contract signed is really the time to bring that team in. Because you're going to have to get on their roadmap as well, right?
I feel like, yeah, definitely. Like with a recent client, we just did a Marketo implementation. And honestly, I felt like I was more working with their web development team than their sales op team because of so much of, what Xander just mentioned, definitely.
Would you echo that? Would you echo that, Gany? I feel like you've become somewhat of a web expert on our side.
No, 100%. I think, when it comes to something like a map, again, the web team needs to be like closely aligned. And on top of that, they have their own jobs that they're doing at the same time. If you bring them in too late, you don't know, they might be in an agile kind of framework where now this project could be like a ton of sprints like down the line, something that they never really resourced for. And that's kind of the big thing is you need to make sure that you at least have one person from all of those departments as your go-to for this project, because it is a collective team effort.
Yeah, for sure. So we've got the team, we have the executive buy-in. Some other things that we maybe want to call out, like what does IT need to be involved for?
So one of the things with IT, domains, CNAME, and like SPF and DKIM, a lot of the super technical stuff that, to be honest, on your day-to-day, like as a marketing ops professional, you're probably never going to think about. It tends to really come up during like this time where it says, hey, you need to make sure that you have like some domain reputation, that if you are moving from one system to another, you're still going to be able to continue to send out emails, continue to run any of the other digital side of things that do require that extra technical expertise that you might not have within your marketing team or your operations team. And you need to go to someone that is technical enough for that.
Yeah, for sure.
And sometimes that can take a while too, especially with the IT team. Most of the times you are jumping onto their sprint. So, I mean, the earlier you can bring them in, the better, because that's like, that's, I would say, the first phase in implementation is that tech setup. So they're almost the people that are going to help you kick this off. So you want to be on their best sprint list and hopefully get them, aligned with you quickly.
And they may not even be responsible for it. Like, depending on the organization structure, this is not something that even the technical teams do a lot of, right? I mean, how often are you getting a new email system that you have to set up, right? Usually you're setting up your corporate email once, maybe twice after you do a migration to a different system. You do it once for your different like tech tools. So it's not something that you can put in a ticket and they just go, oh, okay, this is exactly where it goes. Usually there's a lot of internal, like, is that you? this cloud ops? Is this networking? Is this IT? Is this security? So give them time to figure that out internally. 100%.
Yeah, it's
What
funny.
about on the? Oh,
Yeah.
go ahead, Gany. Sorry.
It's funny because I know for one of the companies I worked at when we were first doing our Marketo migration, the founder was heavily involved just because he's the only one that had access to any of the domains. And it's just like, oh, you should probably be doing more important stuff, but I'm glad you're here.
Size of organization makes a big difference. Absolutely. What about sales ops?
Oh man, with sales ops, there's just one, you need to keep the relationship going. There's a lot of stuff with a new map that comes that does affect the sales team, whether it's just lead status changes, lead sources, how you're tracking MQLs. If you are changing a lot of stuff, you need to make sure that everything that you do in your map gets to sync over to Salesforce without any hiccups. Because again, you have way more sales reps that are going to be looking at the records. They're going to notice when something's off. So you kind of want to make sure, like on a perfect launch, you essentially don't hear anything. It should be as if like you didn't do anything. You just changed it and things run as they should.
Yeah, that was all. Yeah, that was a great way of explaining it, Gany. And and if you're out there, I think Gany and I both were just a single marketing ops person, but in like my old role, I did marketing and sales operations. So I was that person I had to talk to. So I had to focus more on bringing in that revenues, operations person, or the SDRs and the account executives, and I had to really align with them and just making sure I understand their process and know what they would like to see and everything as well. So sometimes it's involving more than just sales ops as well. It's might be those day-to-day people that are actually using the processes.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that it goes without saying, but we're going to say it. If you're in-house and you're doing this type of project, like this is your project, but you're probably also going to be partnering with an outside agency of some sort, whether it's an implementation partner provided by the vendor or it's an agency that you're working with. Like we said, we're working with multiple clients who are doing this. And I think that it's just very important that even though a implementation partner has done it at like the same way or a similar way, it's your business. So if you're coming in and saying, hey, this is where we're going to be a little bit more unique, make sure that you're advocating for yourself in that way.
100%.
So
I think a great call out with the agency too is you still have day-to-day work that you need to maintain as you're doing this project. So getting the extra set of hands is always like a good thing.
Those troubleshooting tickets don't stop, sadly.
No. And if you're responsible for campaign X or anything like that, like you still got to run the business while you're changing the business, right? Well, good. I'd like to move us into the implementation side of things. So we talked a little bit about it with the stakeholders, but what are some of the technical setup things that we need to have in place just to be thinking about? And we'll keep it a little bit high level right now, like not how to go about solving it, but what are the things that we should really be aware of? Gany, do you want to take a stab at that first?
Yeah. Like I mentioned earlier, getting your domains, your CNAME, your SPF and DKIM all set up from the get-go is super important. But you also want to make sure that you are setting your organization up for success and defining users and roles in terms of just, who has admin access. The last thing you want is to have essentially an organization that everyone's an admin, so anyone can change anything. So kind of getting that control. And then from there, there's a lot of just general settings that you want to go through, just time zone, any email settings, like how often are you going to be sending emails, making sure that there is a communication limit of some sort, any tags, form validations, landing page settings. Just those pieces alone at least gives you a lot of momentum going into the project, just because they're easy to check off. And a lot of times it's decisions that you can just make in terms of like how you want to set up marketing ops for your organization.
Yeah, there's not a lot of stakeholder input on some of the settings. Some of the settings do require it, right? Comms limits, you should probably have conversations with your marketing team. But some of the stuff just needs to get done, right? Brian, anything to add there from a tech setup perspective?
I mean, I feel like the big part too is, syncing your CRM to your map. Like, I know that's a big one. So there's, a lot of data that's involved with that, fields and information that's feeding over from your CRM. So, that's a big part of that tech setup is when that initial sync is happening. So really thinking about what's coming over from, let's say, example, Salesforce to Marketo. Is Salesforce cleaned up, or is there any pre-work you need to do in Salesforce before you let all that data sync over? In a sense, are you going to use your contract limits right away? Are you going to max out your contract because you just synced over everyone, when maybe you should have looked at some like deduping before that, or everything like that? So really thinking about that syncing from your CRM to your map. It's a big initial tech setup.
Yeah. And you should probably do it sooner than you think. Connie and I ran into that with one of our first ones where we were like, I think that we need to do it just kind of near the end, turn it on, we're good to go. And it was like, oh, wait, where are all the fields? We need to get that connected. All that metadata was really important. We didn't need the people. We weren't sending emails for a month and a half, but like we needed to get everything set up. So definitely make sure that that is something that you are thinking about sooner than later and pull those stakeholders in. Cool. Brian, let's talk through a little bit of the foundation of your marketing automation platform. If we had budget and we had time to be able to do this stuff, right? Like what should we be thinking about in our initial setup?
Yeah, if you have the time and the budget, the biggest thing I would recommend is working on that Center of Excellence templates. I feel like that's what the map is used for, right? It's a lot of, landing pages and emails and your nurtures and the events, and that's, the purpose of that software. So, really having a great Center of Excellence and templates that, has best practice. If you have the time and the resources to spend on that, are your emails, are they working in dark mode? Are they sending on mobile the way they should be? Like those little things like that will truly matter. So setting it up correct right away can make a whole difference in the world when it comes to testing and stuff later down the road, save you some time. So, setting up the email program, the landing page, content, the events, your nurture, paid social, your web requests, setting up all those templates. That way, those non-admin users can come in and have that template ready to go to clone and really work from it. I mean, that's huge. And that's what's setting the tone for the rest of, your feature within that map.
Yeah, absolutely. That use case that you just listed is kind of like a decentralized model. If you have stakeholders who are just creating it for themselves, they can clone it. But this is one that I'm like, even if you didn't have the time and the budget, like just find some time and budget to make it, because it saves you so much time. Yeah. If you don't have to, if you can create something from a template, like your next 6 months after having that implementation done is going to go so much better than if you don't, right?
Exactly. Well, and if you set it up the way you want it set up in that process, what's happening correctly. That flow of how they're flowing through those emails and the smart campaigns. You have it so organized and processed and documented that nothing's just gonna go astray, and you can troubleshoot easier because you know exactly how it's set up and that template's defined.
Yeah, absolutely.
Another, a big foundational setup as well is, that campaign management as well. Once you have those templates done, is that, that campaign management, there's all those different types of campaign channels and the statuses, and success statuses that you want to bring over. The nice thing probably about having a new map is that the folder structure and those naming conventions, you can start brand new, beautiful blank instance. You can have it exactly that folder structure you would like. That way it's easy to find the campaigns that you're looking for. And that program naming convention is like huge. That leads all the way into Salesforce. And you can, if you have for example, a program name builder sheet, that can keep you organized, and it can just make a whole difference in the world when it comes to just organization and how you're using your map.
Yeah. Gani, anything to add there? Like, let's say that, I'm operating out of HubSpot as opposed to Marketo. Anything that you would recommend there?
Uh, I definitely, again, want to echo what Brian said, where you want the folder structure. That alone is just going to save you a ton of time. But even with the campaign management, you want to make sure that you are like grouping all the assets together. You're making sure that, at least from the HubSpot side, all the landing pages that you are moving over, all the pieces of content, that they're still tied to that same campaign. That way you can at least get some out of the box reporting from HubSpot from the get go as like leads start to come in. And again, I do also want to echo the same thing with templates. You want to get as many templates in there as you want, especially as you start going through and even just looking at forms, for example, which is like something we don't really think about at the time, just because things move fast in marketing. There are times where you see yourself just creating multiple forms, so you kind of want to globalize it just to make your life and everyone's lives much easier down the road. Should there be something small as, hey, like let's add this extra field on here to all our forms.
Oh man, nothing is
Yeah.
worse. I think we still need to have a full dedicated episode on global forms, but nothing was worse than when GDPR first came out and I didn't have global forms where I was at. And oh my goodness, 200 forms that had to get updated. And it was just like,
Yeah, and there's no exporting. There's not an export button for you to just easily.
no.
You're going one by one. So like, globalizing like that, like all your content, like do you have like, content by like low funnel, high funnel, like things like that. Just thinking of ways to globalize that to save you time down the road. Because, what if you need to go out a hidden field to all those, like Xander said, going through one by one of like 200 local forms. Whew.
It's the worst. Set it up right the first time. Absolutely. Brian, what about master order of ops?
Yeah. So, I mean, this is one of those things, like if you have the time and, I would recommend, I'm sure we've done some amazing podcasts, I think, with master order of ops, but if you have the time, set it up correctly. You want to think about ways that you're, speed to lead and how that person's then coming to your map and, and that timing of that lead. So, and what programs they're hitting and the order they're hitting them. So really thinking about like when that lead comes in, if you can set up a master order of ops where they're coming through and they're being enriched and then normalized, and then they went through lead scoring and then lead source and then your life cycle, and that exact order and that speed to lead, you just have that control and that feeling of just like, I know exactly what's going to happen when this lead enters the system and then goes to Salesforce. I know exactly the order. I know exactly what fields are going to update. That comfort from a marketing ops side of it, it's awesome, and it can really help you troubleshoot because you know exactly what order is going to happen. So when you go to that activity log, you can see the exact same thing. But if you're in a migration where you don't really have time to build a life cycle from scratch, you're really just migrating it from your old one. Thinking about like how you can, utilize master order of ops and maybe a V2 and optimization is putting it into a master order of ops and using the executable campaigns and working towards that. But that's a huge one of if you have the time, it can make I could speak all day on it. It can make it just a huge difference in your system.
Yeah, absolutely. And just for the sake of timing, I want to be a little bit mindful, but there's two topics that I think are really important as a part of that build, which is your subscription center, GDPR compliance. Like just because you have a new system doesn't mean that you can go out of compliance. So who wants to take that one?
I can do GDPR. I think this is like the one where it's so important that you have and it's on and it's working right away. That way, of course, if you ever had a GDPR audit, that you're ready to go, especially if you're even migrating it over or starting with a new GDPR program. It's one of those things I would definitely have on ready to go before you start utilizing that map. It's so important that have you're there. That GDPR program is to protect your company, and you have a big role in that. And so you want to make sure it's done correctly. If you have the time, really make sure it's done correctly. Make sure that segment's built up, that they're really flowing through the correct, are they explicit single, or are they implicit, are they double, or, what that process is like and what that user experience is like. But you definitely want to make sure this is done before turning it on, because you want to protect the company you're working for, and so they don't get fined, because those are some heavy fines if you do.
Very heavy fines. Out on our website, cs2marketing.com, we do have some really great resources when it comes to setting up a GDPR compliant process. And we also have it on our roadmap for a explicit podcast episode. So stay tuned for more, but we do have some resources that you can access right away from the website. Last thing, Gany, if you could jump in. Lists and segmentations and key lists, like how should you approach that?
It's going to be something where you're going to be working very closely with your marketing team. Depending on where you are in terms of like the size of the company, are you going into a map for the first time, or if you're moving from one map to another, you kind of want to make sure that marketing can still go out and communicate to the exact same context that they've already been used to communicating. Again, there's certain things that you want to make sure do come over, like who's been unsubscribed already, who any like company specific segmentations where kind of like Brian mentioned, there's a top of the funnel leads versus middle of the funnel, bottom of the funnel, that you can still slice and dice as you did in the last map tool. Again, just to make sure that you can still hit the same audience at the like you always did. But you also have to make sure that your marketing team is aware of how to get there. Because again, they might not be living in Marketo as much as you. So of course it's going to be easy for you to find it. Same thing with HubSpot too. You can have a lot of like dynamic lists or just static lists that you know what they are, but your team might not know what they are. So just organizing it in a way where you can kind of just point to it and say like, hey, this is how you identify key segmentations and key audience lists that you can use for any of your other marketing campaigns would be immensely helpful for the rest of the team.
Fantastic. Yes. Very important step. I think that, you hit the nail on the head. It's about making sure that everybody knows how to use those and having it set up properly. Third phase of implementation, optimization. You've got everything built. You feel like you're ready to go, but there's still a little bit more to take care of. Brian, would you just walk us through high level what this step is? We're not going to go into some of the details yet, but would love to just make sure that we're setting ourselves up for success with this launch.
Definitely. I think one thing is, after you're turned on and you're moving along, is really that optimization of like, thinking about your data hygiene, your reporting, your deprecating your old processes and integrations and leveraging like new functionality. All those things really matter. You're going to really, once that stuff has synced over from Salesforce, it's in there, you're going to start realizing like, I need to dedupe, and I need to have a dedupe strategy. I need to really look at my data hygiene and like lead sourcing. And there's a lot of, all those processes that need optimization, especially if you're just migrating it over and you didn't have time to build this best in class program or that master order of ops. If you have the time here in that third phase, really work on improving those processes or just that documentation around this as well. That way you can do great work.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I think it's never done. It's going to be a continual process. Just get it built into your roadmap right away. Technical things, if they can be done or if they need to be done, obviously, if you have processes that are built out that you're replacing, get those taken care of before you launch. But you can always, do those iterative improvements post-launch. Just make sure that you have a plan to address it. Otherwise, it just turns into a ticket in the backlog that never gets looked at, right? So fantastic. We've got implementation. We're ready to go. The third pillar that we wanted to talk through was testing, enablement, and launch. So Gany, let's talk about testing a little bit. What are ways that we can go about doing that effectively?
My first thing is to always just go through every single way someone can enter your database. I'm sure there's a million different tactics that people use, whether it's through paid ad integration, maybe it's a third-party tool where someone can register for an event or webinar. You have form builds, you have list upload, maybe they're coming in through Salesforce. You just want to make sure that however all those leads are coming in, that they are running through the process that you designed and you set forward for your company. So again, making sure that if they do come in, that they are getting scored, that their life cycle is getting updated depending on how it's set up for you guys. And pretty much just, again, noting when things are different from your testing environment. Because there's so many edge cases that you probably just can't test through all of them. So making sure that you are aware that, what you designed isn't going to be 100% bulletproof, but there's a time to make it 100% bulletproof.
Yeah, definitely. And testing is what's going to help get that in front of people, before there's a disaster. Brian, what were you going to say?
Yeah, I think that's great. And like what I caught myself doing when I did like testing scenarios and stuff is I'd often use like a mapping, like whimsical or Miro board or something, the way to really draw it out that way. Because sometimes when you're in testing and you have like 3 pages of activity logs of you're trying to look through of each thing, that it's almost so much to look at. It's hard. So sometimes I would take one of my test leads and actually map it out from beginning to end of exactly what happens. And I was able to really figure out like, okay, this updated here, like this process happened in this order, these are the things that updated during that process, and able to kind of look at it as a whole on a, on a charted document and say, okay, well, this is where this went wrong or this shouldn't happen. I was able to really find that super helpful and really supply with the client, like, this is what's happening. Do we want to change this? Really have that conversation without having to open that activity log of that person and like, oh, maybe it's on page 2. Let me scroll down. Like that. You can have it all mapped out nice and clean in the exact order it happened. I found that very helpful for me going into testing. And it was also a nice documentation piece as well. Like I could also take that and say, okay, this is what's happening currently, and this is what we're going to do to optimize it, make it better.
Yeah. Gany and I've started doing that with most projects. You have your flow chart of how it's supposed to be designed, and then you have your flow chart of how it's actually going, and you're like, oh, well, we intended on changing that, or it's actually an issue, and you can definitely relate the two. Very good. One just quick call out, and we can go into it further on a future episode, but that is testing Salesforce. Oftentimes we don't have a sandbox for a marketing automation platform connected to a sandbox of Salesforce. But what we will do is we will log in as the Marketo user, whatever you're using for your sync, and basically reproduce what like a new lead would look like from whatever automation platform that you have. I know I said Marketo, but you can do this for any of them. And that can help because that makes sure that if you have exceptions in your validation rules or exceptions in your processes, that it's still flowing through. Because most likely you're going to be making CRM changes based upon having the new marketing automation platform in some capacity. Brian, what about enablement?
Oh, I love this piece. I feel like I like enablement because it's like you just did all this hard work and it's finally like you're ready to almost show it off and like train other people. Like, look at like what I've done. Like, it's like all that center of excellence templates, all that stuff's ready to go. It's like now you're ready to show people and use it and stuff. So I always liked this part of it. I don't know why. It was exciting for me. It was like, I felt like it was a big accomplishment and like, you're like ready to share it. And so like, the biggest thing is, walking through the day-to-day users, like if it's that marketing manager that's creating emails or if it's another admin or your own director or whoever that is, it's really walking them through that system and what they need to know. And is it documented in that process? That way, when it's time to launch and it's happening, they're ready to go side by side with you and able to execute what they need to execute.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And you can do enablement in so many different ways. We have also another great episode on enablement, documentation, and training that we did with Joy just a few weeks ago as well. So definitely an opportunity to deep dive into that. And all of the concepts that we used in that episode are going to be relevant here. So we are at the quote unquote last step, launch. Any gotchas, any recommendations for people as we approach launch from either of you?
Brian, I can take a stab at this to start. But the testing's never over, you know. One of the things is, again, as soon as you launch, you just want to make sure that you are testing things, and again, ensuring that things flow. We also want to monitor just regular business processes, like if MGO is like super important in your business. Was there a sudden dip or a sudden increase in MQLs? Those extremes can kind of at least give you a good barometer of just like, was this a quiet transition? Are people going to notice it, or is it super disruptive because now you've changed like so many settings, so many things? And how do you make sure you have like a good contingency plan should you need to revert back to the original state just to make those tweaks before going fully live?
Fantastic. Brian, anything from you?
Yeah, I mean, I like one thing too is like I found very helpful for me is having a monitoring log and change logged. I mean, there's so much you're doing that is huge to the marketing side of your business that, there's just a lot of moving parts to this. So I found that if I had a monitoring log and a change log, I was able to go back and be like, well, what did we do? Why did we make this decision? When did we turn it on? Like, and looking at those changes made it super helpful, especially having that monitoring log is too, you have a way to quickly find those smart lists you have built out, let's say in Marketo, to see like issues. And that way you can really check things after that launch quickly, and make sure that things aren't going crazy.
That's great. Well, you guys, thank you so much. This is obviously a very large topic. I think that, there's details that we would love to walk people through. But I think that this was really helpful to just give everybody a framework to operate off of, right? We've got pre-work, we have implementation. Within that, you have your tech setup, you have your foundational work, you have all of the optimizations that you can take it further. And then you have to make sure that you're enabling it, documenting it, and getting it launched effectively. And then just remember that it's always going. Super important. So guys, thank you so much for joining us today. Is there anything else that you want to tell our audience before we sign off for the episode?
Honestly, it's just with any map migration, it's just the more you can document, the better. This is going to be something that it's a big purchase. So you just want to make sure that what's going on as well as all your other stakeholders. Because it's not just a marketing change, it's a business change.
Love that. And, Brian, what about you?
That's exactly what I was going to say as well. Words out of my mouth, I was like, because that documentation, it matters so much for when you're going back and you're monitoring or optimizations later on. That was so helpful for me. But also too is just, keeping aligned, even after the launch, keeping aligned with that team that helped you got this like started and stuff, and being very thankful for them, and keeping that great business relationship with them, because they just helped you hit a huge milestone for your role and what you just took on in accomplishment. So also being thankful for the team members as well.
That's fantastic. Thank you both so much for your time today. You've been listening to the Revenue Growth Architects podcast by CS2. We appreciate you listening and would greatly appreciate it if you would give us a review. Your feedback helps us make these episodes so much better. Thank you so much and have a great day.